Thank you to everybody joining us. We're just admitting everyone to the webinar and we'll be getting everything started right away. Thank you for your patience and for joining us this afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be getting the event underway in just a moment. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting this afternoon from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition to that, the land beneath my feet belongs to the community that was once the Métis community of Roostertown. We are here this afternoon with a really wonderful event, and so grateful that you could join us both here on Zoom, live on YouTube, both now and in the future. I'd like to begin with a few thanks before we move on to the official program for this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Simon and Schuster Canada, who are, of course, the publishers of today's featured book, Secrets of the Sprakkar, Iceland's Extraordinary Woman and How They Are Changing the World. There you are. Again, Simon and Schuster, thank you so very much. We also have a wonderful number of local partners who are helping to present this event. The first of whom is Lögberg-Heimskringla, which is, of course, a newsletter that that services all of North America's Icelandic community. We've had the pleasure of working with them on many occasions, and as I was mentioning to them earlier on, it's always such an incredible pleasure to work with the Icelandic community here, both in the city and beyond, both for the enthusiasm and the passion that they invariably bring to everything. Our other co-presenter I'll bring up in just a moment, but before I do, I just wanted to mention a few quick notes about how to participate this afternoon. You'll notice we do have a live chat that's ready to go, so please, if you have any comments at all, please feel free to put them in the chat. While we may not be able to see all of them necessarily, we will certainly be sure to pass along any positive comments you might have to all of today's participants. In addition, there'll come time for a public Q&A later on as well. So as questions occur to you, please feel free to write them in the Q&A button, which you will find right at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Rest assured you won't interrupt the proceedings when you write in a question, and we'll be sure to get to as many of your questions as time permits. But that is more than enough for me right now. I would now like to begin by introducing our other community partner for this event, and that is, of course, the Icelandic Canadian Frón here in Winnipeg, who are based out of the Scandinavian Centre. Like Lögberg-Heimskringla, they're a group that we've worked with on many occasions, and we couldn't be more delighted that they were on board to help spread the word around this fabulous event and so many others. So to say a few words, just before we get started, I would like to invite up their president, Signy Thorstensen, to say a few words. Signy?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Signy Thorstensen. I'm president of the Icelandic Canadian Frón in Winnipeg. I'm bringing welcome from the Icelandic Canadian Frón in Winnipeg, as well as the Scandinavian Centre. I just want to say thank you to John and McNally's for us having the opportunity to co-present this wonderful afternoon and celebrating Secrets of the Sprakkar. We just wanted to wish Ms. Reid much success with her book and look very forward to this discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Signy. At this point, I would like to introduce both of our featured speakers this afternoon. Your host for this afternoon is the absolutely wonderful author, Terry Fallis. Two-time winner of the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. Terry is the award-winning author of 8 national bestsellers, including his latest novel, Operation Angus, all published by McClelland and Stewart. As you can tell, his books are quite popular around these parts. His debut novel, The Best Laid Plans, won the 2011 edition of CBC Canada Reads and was adapted as a 6-part television miniseries for CBC and as a stage musical. He also teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. And of course, this afternoon's feature guest, Eliza Reid, is a journalist, editor, and co-founder of the annual Iceland Writers Retreat. Eliza grew up on a hobby farm near Ottawa, Canada, and moved to Iceland in 2003, 5 years after meeting the man who later became her husband, Gudni Johannesson. When he first took office as president of Iceland on August 1st, 2016, Eliza became the country's first lady. In that capacity, she has been active in promoting gender equality, entrepreneurship and innovation, tourism and sustainability, as well as the country's writers and rich literary heritage. Please give a very warm virtual welcome to Terry Fallis and Eliza Reid.
Wow, John, thank you so much. And it is such a pleasure to be working again with the good folks at McNally Robinson, one of the finest independent purveyors of books in this country. John always does such a great job. And Eliza, how nice to see you. Even though we're not in the same room, it's great to see your face again.
Likewise, Terry, likewise.
Full disclosure here, we know one another. You were kind enough to invite me onto the faculty of the Iceland Writers Retreat back in 2018, and that was a formative experience for me. I'd never been to Iceland. My wife came with me. We had an extraordinary time, as almost anyone does who arrives in what is, in a way, for those of us who have never been there, is a strange and wonderful place. So thank you for that. And it certainly gave me great context for reading your wonderful book, Secrets of the Sprakkar. So, but before we get into the book, Eliza, tell me, how has this whirlwind been for you? I mean, it's your first book. It's launched into what we hope is the tail end of the pandemic. It's earned wonderful reviews. I mean, you have a glowing blurb from Hillary Clinton on the front cover. It doesn't get much better than that. What has this all been like for you?
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, John and McNally's and Signe and the Canadian Frón for sponsoring and hosting this event and inviting me to take part. Part of what this is like for me is that it's incredibly fun and incredibly an honor, and I still can't believe that people are asking me to come and take part in all of these Zoom calls. So thank you to all of you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's my first book, so I have nothing to compare it to, but I suppose like my journey as First Lady and really in some ways what I feel like my whole life has been just a lot of fun, different adventures, and this is just like that. I had the idea at the outset of the pandemic, probably because the life sort of shifted, and all of a sudden we had, or I at least had more ideas just popping into my head because I wasn't doing so much with the Iceland Writers Retreat or when I was serving as First Lady, and hopefully it is coming out, as you say, hopefully at the knock on wood tail end of the pandemic in some way. So it's really been interesting. And for me, at least, it's been a fascinating process, not only putting the words on the page. Actually, I confess that I found that the most challenging part of it all. But I think the whole parcel of creating a book, from getting the idea to practicalities like finding an agent and writing a book proposal, to conducting all of the interviews, editing, writing, deciding how I was going to plot it out, and now the whole process of marketing it and talking about it and promoting it is all really interesting. And you'll have to forgive the sort of blurred background here. It's because I'm actually in Washington, D.C. to take part in an Icelandic cultural promotional event. And so I'm in my hotel room, and I thought nobody wants to see all the messiness of my hotel room, which is why it's all blurred here.
Well, we really only want to see you anyway, Eliza, so that's just fine. Tell me, when you in the editing process, does an editor edit the First Lady of Iceland differently than an editor might edit a lowly novelist like me?
I hope not. You'd have to ask my editors, I guess. I hope not. I hope, I was very lucky too. I had a couple of friends who have a background in editing, because this is probably, I hope this is also normal. At first I was also nervous to even just send it to the editors who were supposed to edit it. So I very fortunately had two friends who I would send one draft chapter to first, who could really say, take that whole section out, or I got really bored halfway through, or, very constructive feedback. And then had excellent support. I had two different editors here at Simon & Schuster in Canada from Source Books, who are the American publishers. And so it was really great as well to have a couple of, some different voices providing feedback, and it absolutely made the book much better than it would have.
Good. I'm glad to hear you say that. It's, I think often writers lament sometimes what editors do to their manuscripts, but I've always found in my experience that editors make the books invariably better. So I'm glad that you had that experience too. I did read the glowing review in the New York Times, and I loved how the piece opened. Bear with me. Let me just read you the first few sentences from the opening of the New York Times review. It starts, "A few months ago, the First Lady of Iceland appeared on the cover of a widely read Icelandic newspaper. In the photo, she commanded the foreground, welcoming the Crown Prince of Denmark, while her husband, the president, smiled in the background. In the caption, though, only the men were named. Annoyed, the First Lady did what many women, but few political spouses would do, and took to Facebook. And you said, 'One man with a name came to dinner at another man with a name's house,' she posted. 'That is all. Hashtag, do women exist?'" I really loved that that used your sense of humor there, but also a sense of frustration. But it did remind me that the whole concept of the First Lady, in a way, feels like it evolved out of a patriarchal assumption that only men hold power.
Mm-hmm.
How do you so comfortably inhabit your role or redefine your role as a feminist First Lady in a way that so clearly promotes equality? It's probably not always easy.
No, I mean, it's a strange title, isn't it? And I'm often asked, especially since I started being more outspoken about gender equality and writing pieces myself in the New York Times and writing this book, I'm often asked, how can you be called this, or what do you want to be called instead? And to be honest, I don't mind being called it at all. I think because I have, I do ultimately have this platform in a sense, or talk about it, because my husband is the president, and the term First Lady, I find somehow slightly more palatable even than wife of, and somehow it's always going to be defined that way. And of course, I have a totally different name from my husband. And so I don't mind being called that. I think it's really more what you do with the position. And as you said, I think when I had the fortune of beginning to serve in this sort of non-official role, I was a bit nervous that I knew that I always wanted to speak up, and I knew that I wanted to use my voice and not be some kind of human arm candy for my husband. But I also am by nature very much a rule follower, and I wanted to serve with dignity, and I didn't want to break any rules, and I didn't want to do anything that I wasn't, quote unquote, allowed to do. And so I think, especially at the beginning, I was quite cautious, but then I realized that because there is no handbook on how to do this or what to do, you can't break the rules, because there are no written rules. So I just had to trust in my own integrity and my own intuition, which I do trust very much, and realize that I was very troubled by the idea that I wanted to talk about gender equality, among other things. But there was this irony that I only had this platform because of something my husband had achieved. And so again, then I started to think, well, in life, many people have advantages or privileges for something that they didn't control themselves. And we can either spend our time worrying about how this has happened, or we can actually try to be using it for something good. And so I have just tried to be doing that. And in doing so, and in speaking up, in speaking especially Icelandic with an accent, which is very important to me to do. I think that I'm just trying to show that, if I have a platform, if I'm in a position where people want to listen to what I have to say, then I might as well be trying to say something that I think is important.
Couldn't agree more. That makes a lot of sense. I wondered if you sort of watched as Hillary Clinton when she was first lady, or Jill Biden as first lady now. Do you look at others as potential role models? They are both women of substance, as are you. Were they helpful to you, just as you observed them even?
I think, you know, I of course, American first ladies have such a high profile that inevitably we end up seeing them and we know the titles. But I have met other spouses of heads of state who I admire equally, because, you know, they're generally very smart, educated, interesting people and individuals in unique situations that I can relate to a degree. So I just like I've learned from so many people in all different aspects of life, I think that they've been very interesting, you know, role models, and I think it's just very important, you know, especially for women who are in these positions of for women who are married to male heads of state. I think that is something that we need to show people, because so much of it has to do with the visibility of role models and voices and the sort of subtle messages that we're sending to people. And if we never speak up, if we never talk, I think that sends a message that I at least don't want to be sending.
Yeah, it's possible to move backwards if you're not saying anything, in a way. So yeah, I quite agree. Onto the book. First of all, the title is just amazing. To discover an Icelandic word like Sprakkar, which I understand is not all that well known, a word that you hadn't heard of, but it's a pronounceable word for those of us in North America. But it means extraordinary women. I mean, you just had to use that in the title. You had no choice. Tell us a bit about how that title came about.
Thanks. I was really excited about that, because I knew when I was trying to think of the title, I knew that I wanted, or I was hoping to find an Icelandic word, like you say, that we could say in English, that described a concept that was germane to the book. You know, and then I was thinking of words like the word for equality in Icelandic is jafnrétti, which doesn't roll off the tongue quite so easily. So I couldn't quite think of what it was, and it was actually, and I think this makes the word even better. So it was an immigrant friend of mine in Iceland who had another friend who said, well, there's this old word, Sprakkar, which is the singular. It's a masculine word grammatically. It means outstanding woman. It used to mean just woman, and then sort of evolved to mean outstanding or wonderful women. And nobody had heard of it. I mean, my husband hadn't heard of it, and his mother, who was an Icelandic teacher, hadn't heard of it. And I called the Artni Magnusson Institute, which is the institute that looks after the sagas, and I spoke to the director. This is, I guess, first lady privilege, you know. And I said, I'm writing this book, and I found this word, and I think it's a word, it's in the dictionary at least, but nobody has ever heard of it, and sort of, may I use it again? Because I thought, if I can't use it, then I'll just, it won't look good. But she hadn't heard of it either, but she said, yeah, no, it seems it's an actual word. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's a perfect word, because there's so many words that we use in English that describe women in a negative way. That infantilize them or sexualize them or focus on their looks or something. And this is just a word that focuses so much on their character. And so I also hope that we start to use it more in Icelandic as well, and more in daily discourse. I think it's like this Danish concept of hygge that we've seen, you know, the sort of coziness. I hope that this is an Icelandic word that we can bring into the dialogue here.
Well, it's a great word, and to bring it back, to resurrect it, and perhaps to strengthen its use and make it a more popular word. That's part of social movements, is the words that we use to describe them. And a word like that can be another arrow in the quiver in the fight for equality. So I love the word, and it has also such a strength to it, like Sprakkar. I feel like someone standing on a beach, before a battle, clenching their fists and yelling Sprakkar.
It's onomatopoeic.
Yeah, it is onomatopoeic, without question. Eliza, I was trying to, in a way, to categorize your book, to slot it into a nice, neat little category in literature, but it has strenuously resisted my attempts. So in a way, this is part memoir, it is part journalism, it's part public policy, advocacy. Maybe it's even part travel writing in a way. How did you come up with this unique way of telling this important story?
It is kind of a hodgepodge, isn't it? I think that was a challenge when I was pitching the book, because publishers, they want to say right away, what shelf will it go on in the bookstore?
That's right.
And as you say, that's a bit of a challenge. I think as I went along, I focused it a little bit more. I always knew that I wanted that memoir thread. I thought it was important for me to write a relatable book because I didn't want to write a treatise or a dry policy only book. I wanted to illustrate some of these points by talking to regular people to whom we can all relate in some way. And I thought that my own story was interesting enough. And I thought that it was interesting as a relatable thread for people. But I didn't want just to write a memoir about myself. I didn't think, well, maybe I'll get to write a memoir when I'm not First Lady anymore with all the really good stories of being First Lady. But, I didn't, to illustrate gender equality or what I was trying to do, which is to illustrate what it's like to live in, quote unquote, the world's best country for women. You can't use only one voice for that because my experience is going to be different from any number of other people's experiences. So if I wanted to talk about that, I knew right away that I had to incorporate as broad and diverse a range of voices as possible. It was also pragmatic because it plays to my own background as a journalist. So I have a lot of experience in doing profile writing, but I also have this interest in travel writing. So you're right. At first, I actually saw a lot more of a sort of travelogue dimension to it, but I felt that maybe got a little bit it distracted a little bit from the point. But there are bits, I hope that it paints a nice picture of a country overall anyway, that it's sort of this reportage combined with memoir as well. And really it is, I hope it's sort of a portrait of a country with gender equality as a theme. But because I'm also serving as First Lady right now, what I didn't want to write, and I don't think that I ought to write, is a really prescriptive book that somehow says Iceland is great. In your country, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and this will solve things. And you need to elect politicians who will have X, Y, Z policies. I'm not serving in a political role, and I don't think that it's my position to be telling other countries how they should be doing things. So while I do hopefully make the point there that certain policies that exist in Iceland have absolutely been beneficial to me and to other people, I recognize that all countries are different and have different challenges and priorities. But hopefully, if there's anything prescriptive about the book, it's just the message that gender equality, working towards achieving gender equality, is something that is going to benefit people of all genders, that it is not a zero-sum game where it is one group benefiting at the expense of another. That it is something, no matter how we choose to do that or the priorities that we have in that it's something that is going to be good for everyone, and that we as individuals can all make a difference in that debate, so that we shouldn't just say, well, I'm going to go to the ballot box, I'm going to elect the leaders who are putting through XYZ policies. But really, I hope that people feel that while it's absolutely important to have strong role models in all aspects of society, including politics, we also can all make a difference in our own lives, and making sure that we elevate each other's voices, that we are role models in our own communities in a positive way as well.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Just before we leave this whole question of memoir, you do tell a personal side of this story. It runs through the book, and we've come to know that voice so well. We get to know you. We're right there with you when you arrive, and when you land your first job, or even when you discover you're pregnant and you go to the doctor the way we would in North America, and you're summarily told to head down to the midwife. Fascinating cultural experience in a moment of high drama. But I wondered whether the publishers had an instinct that maybe this would be a pure memoir and less of the sort of not divided, but it's a mix. It's a hybrid book you have written. Any pressure just to be more memoirish?
No, I didn't feel that actually. Not at all. I think that the narrative thread was important. No, I think because these interviews, they're really the backbone of the book so much that I think that it would have been a completely different book. But I chose to work with publishers as well who weren't going to emphasize, I was quite clear that I also didn't want a book, that ended with bullet points at the end of every chapter that sort of pablum fed you, okay, do these 3 things to increase women in political life, or do these 3 things to have more representation in business. That's not the kind of book that I wanted to write. And so I didn't really want to work with a publisher that really wanted to focus it. It's not like a self-help book kind of thing.
Right.
With due respect for self-help books, completely.
yeah, exactly. But it's interesting how you respected, in a way, your role as First Lady as well, and your role as connected to the head of state of a sovereign nation, that you don't want to tell other nations how to do it.
No, and I mean, if I can, sorry to interrupt you, Terry.
Please.
Just to elaborate on that a little bit, because it's something I'm very cognizant of, that the president of Iceland is not a political role, much more like Canada's governor general, for instance, than the prime minister. We have a prime minister in Iceland. My husband is not a member of a political party. I'm not a member of a political party. And I felt, like I was, just by writing a book about gender equality, I felt like I was pushing the envelope enough in terms of what I was doing. And I'm happy to do that. And I think that's important. But I deliberately didn't interview any serving cabinet ministers or any currently nationally serving politicians, because again, I didn't want to, to me, this isn't a partisan political issue, and I didn't want to highlight partisan politics in any way. So I tried, inevitably, you have people who have some political affiliation or brand, but I tried to be as representative as I could overall, so that I wasn't expressing any specific political viewpoints.
Right. Yeah. I wonder, has there been any pushback at all from anybody about the book? I mean, it is a book with a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered, has anyone politically or otherwise in Iceland said,
mm-hmm.
you shouldn't be saying things like that? That's not your
mm-hmm.
role.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure there's people, on the internet and places who dislike the fact that I get up in the morning, or, that I've ever created any Facebook status. So if I, with respect, discount that, I haven't noticed anything, if I could put it sort of mainstream like at all. And I think that again says something about the state of gender equality in Iceland. I mean, I've worked always since I've been First Lady. I've run the Iceland Writers Retreat. I have a background in journalism. This was my idea that I did entirely on my own and without any assistance from the Office of the President. So of course I should be doing it. But I think that I don't mind if somebody asks that question. That it's because I feel very strongly that this is something that I should be able to do, and so I'm happy to debate that with somebody else who might disagree.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm glad no one has raised their voice in a negative way about it, because they certainly have no grounds to. But if you were in another country, you might have gotten that more. I'm thinking about the emerging political feelings in North America, where
Sure.
So I'm glad.
Coffee syndrome that we say.
Yes, and may you continue to have that success and that reception. But onto your journalism background, that meant that you were particularly well suited to crisscross the country, interviewing Sprakkar, if I may put it that way, and telling their stories so well in the book. Like Raga, who is, among others, a sexual health instructor and a knitting tour operator, as one is. I mean, I know a few people like that. Or Ugla Stefania, who identifies as a trans, feminine, non-binary person. How did you find these extraordinary women, and what do they mean to this book? I mean, to me, I think of the interviews as the book's spine of inspiration that really brings these important ideas to life.
I think, definitely it was important for me to have a diversity of voices here. And so as you see, sometimes I speak to groups of people, sometimes I speak to individuals. I tried to have I think the youngest person is about 21 who I spoke with, the oldest was 87. They come from different foreign backgrounds. They have different gender identities, as you say. There is a woman with disabilities. They come from different parts of the country, and that was important to me to have those different voices. And then when I was looking, I started first with the sort of aspects of society that I wanted to cover, being parenting, working life, sexuality. I have a chapter on sort of nature, land and sea, because in Iceland, the society is so connected to nature. And so then I tried to populate those sections with people that I could interview. And because of this memoir thread, I also, if I knew someone personally, tried to interview someone who I knew personally. Also because I kind of knew the tone that I wanted and knew the idea, but I thought that helped, again, make the story more personal. What I didn't want was the spokesperson for X association is promoting X or Y, or someone who would, maybe Vigdis, the very first female president of the world. I wanted really more people whose achievements we could all relate to in some way or another, even though they're sometimes the first or not. So Raka, for instance, I met her years and years ago because I profiled her knitting tours, and I knew that, and I just met her maybe 15 years ago, wrote these stories about her. She tried to give me knitting lessons, and I was very bad at it, and I have not improved. But then I wanted to speak to someone who was some sort of a sex advisor, or who could at least comment on Icelandic sort of sexual mores. And so I spoke to her. I knew that I wanted a trans woman or a non-binary person in the book. And this is another wonderful thing about Iceland, and we're a small society. I then immediately thought, okay, out of all the trans women I know, who do I think that I should speak to? Because I knew several trans women, just having lived in Iceland, who I used to work with or knew as a neighbor, whatever the circumstance was. And I mean, I'm probably going on a bit of a tangent here, but this is one of the things that Ugla points out in the book when we talk about trans rights in Iceland, is the fact that the queer community overall works so well together. And partly that is because we're small, that the most cis people do know trans people just through living our lives. And that really helps to sort of diminish any fear of the unknown, to put it crudely. So Ugla actually didn't know well at all, but had done a lot, had read a lot of their reading and their comments, and I think they're a very articulate person, and I was really happy with that interview. And I liked that they grew up in the countryside in this sort of remote part of Iceland. And again, one's instinct might be, oh, maybe there's again, that's maybe my own prejudice, maybe there's more ignorance there, and they said that wasn't all the case. It was just a wonderful place to grow up.
Well, it makes me want to ask you, in a way, because you knew some of these women, or you researched them before you went to see them, you probably had a viewpoint, you probably had an expectation of what they might say, knowing them and researching them. Were you ever surprised by any of them? Anyone catch you off guard?
Well, yeah, as you say, it's sort of interesting because now I am the interviewee in many circumstances, and this maybe happens to you as well, Terry. But there's something that really irritates me when I'm being interviewed, and that is when the journalist is just waiting for that one quote. They know exactly what they want to get from you, and they're waiting for you to say it. And if you say something that's even a little bit different, they say, "Oh no, but didn't you actually find the such and?" And they're not listening to anything that you have to say. And it's this line, because of course I want to be well prepared, because I have a limited time. This isn't a book where I'm going to meet each person 10 times before I use the best quotes from them. Right. But I wanted to go to it open-minded as well. But I also knew that I wanted a sort of, broadly speaking, book that had a positive and a warm tone to it, even though it was realistic. So you were talking about mistakes, when I was
surprises.
Yeah. So one I can think of is Elín, who is a search and rescue crew volunteer. She's in this chapter on land and sea. And Iceland has a wonderful volunteer-led search and rescue organization. And Elín is one of relatively few women who runs one of the chapters in the countryside. And because there are, it's not at all gender balanced yet. There's quite a few more men who work in this organization. I thought that she would probably tell me some stories of really having to kind of prove herself, or face some kind of masculinity that she didn't really belong because she was a woman. And she said it was completely the opposite. She said she's never taken part in a more gender blind organization. And of course, other women may have a different story to tell or not. I don't know. That was her story. But when I thought about it, of course, I thought to actually become a search and rescue crew member, you have to be really tough. I mean, you have to do all kinds of physical tests and go, climb cliffs and then go jump out of helicopters and all these things. And so I think that if you've done that, people don't really care what your gender is, because you've already had this sort of physical achievement. So she said that she felt her gender didn't limit her in any way taking on this role, and that was a great thing, I thought.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. We're winding down here. I just a couple of other questions to close out before we open the floor to our audience questions. I read a great, I think it was on Facebook yesterday when you were visiting at the White House, and your Facebook post, you actually said, "Earlier today, I met with American First Lady Dr. Jill Biden at the White House. The occasion was Women's History Month. I also had a chance to meet Dr. Biden's husband, President Joe Biden. We all discussed the importance of gender equality, role models, and being good examples for the next generation." Mm-hmm. I love your sense of humor that came through there. I know you to have a sense of humor. Do you think a sense of humor has a role to play in advancing the cause of gender equality in Iceland, but elsewhere?
I always think it does. I mean, humor always lightens things. I think we're always at a bit of risk if we're careful not to be misunderstood, that what I think is a joke maybe isn't taken as a joke by everyone. But broadly speaking, of course, it's important to have a sense of humor, and it's important to be warm-hearted. And I hope that is the tone of the book. I hope there's moments in the book that people laugh at, because I was trying to be funny and self-deprecating and all of these things. It's interesting, I did have a lot of positive feedback about that one comment, that people said, this is a great way to put it and everything. But in reality, it was very pragmatic, because it was Dr. Biden who invited me to the White House and invited me to have the meeting. And so from a sort of protocol regular point of view, she was the one who invited me that I met with. And it so happened that her husband stopped by when he was there, and I also spoke with him, but he wasn't the person who had invited me to the meeting initially. So I didn't deliberately word that to try to sound particularly feminist, but it just was actually the way that it turned out.
I understand, but that makes it even better, right? That just makes it better. And so I love that. And I quite agree. There is plenty of, rage and anger are wholly justified when thinking about gender equality because of what women have endured for millennia. But I often think that humor can often give us a different entry point to an issue and mobilize some people who may not have been mobilized in other ways. So I really applauded your use of humor. Plus it was your voice coming through, and that made the book more real.
Well, I think it's not an antagonistic thing. I think this is the difficulty, is that everything has become so binary that if you're not with us on everything that I think, you are against me on everything that I think, and we can't progress in any way if that's the tone of the dialogue. And I think that humor is very important there, and I also think that was what I was trying to showcase with these women, with gender equality. I asked several of them, are you a feminist? And they said, no, I'm not. I'm a feminist. I'm doing this. And that, I consider myself a feminist, but I'm not going to tell somebody else that they have to think of themselves as a feminist. And that's exactly what I wanted, because it isn't, I think that it isn't this us against them binary debate. And if there's one thing that I wish that I'd included more in the book, or I don't say I wish I did, because I don't feel that there was really room for it in the scope of this, but that is the role of men in this debate. Because one of the reasons that we're doing so well in Iceland is the fact that we have a lot of male allies who realize, and, people like you, Terry, who I know are, have long been feminists, and, who realize that this isn't something that is trying to have women climb to the top of the mountain and push everybody else down the hill behind them, that this is something that's going to benefit everybody. And I think in Iceland, that has also enabled us, in politics and business and in parenthood, to make these strides.
It's a wonderful story. Let me finally ask you, you've done such an amazing job, you and your colleagues, your partners who have run the Iceland Writers Retreat for these many years. What has that experience contributed to your approach to this book and the success of it?
Well, it was great when I had to find blurbs, I'll tell you straight up. That's maybe not the answer you're thinking of, but that's,
No, it wasn't, but I like it though.
For first-time authors, it's very hard to get, these endorsements, as you say, the quotes on the backs of books. And it just so happens that if you've run a writer's retreat for several years, you've had the opportunity to meet several authors and maybe get to call and ask a favor of them. So I'm very grateful for that. But, I love doing this project because it's something that we created from nothing. It wasn't even a project that my colleague Eric and I took over from somebody else. It was something that we made ourselves. And so many people have great experiences there and talk about how it's just one of the best trips that they've ever had or experiences that they've had. And it's unbelievably rewarding to feel like that we have contributed in some way to that. And then, we've learned so much, of course, about all event planning and all kinds of things. I'm here, in Washington, D.C., as I was saying, where Erica lives. And we've ordered all kinds of lanyards and things for the Iceland Writers Retreat, which we're having next month. And so I was in the hotel here with this arm full of all these lanyards that I'm going to bring back to Iceland to use, or split it. We're very, very practical. And the guy in the elevator with me turned to look at me, he said, "Are you an event planner?" And I said, "What makes you think that?" Because I'm holding, all these lanyards. And he said, and he sort of looked at, and I said, "Well, in a sense, I am." Yes.
In a sense? Isn't that funny? He had no idea he was in the elevator with the Iceland's first lady. That's
and an event planner.
And an event planner. Well, you've created a wonderful cultural institution in Iceland, and now you've created a wonderful book to contribute to the debate and advancing the cause of women. And really enjoyed our conversation, but it's not over yet because I have a couple of questions here that have come in. So if you bear with me,
sure.
I'm gonna read them without actually knowing what they say, which is never a good idea. But
okay.
All right. So Michelle writes, "What is the best way we as Canadians of Icelandic descent can continue to lead the world in human rights on this very difficult world stage?" Wow, that's a big question.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Michelle. Not just Canadians of Icelandic descent, but anyone. And I would say to just speak up and use your voices and speak up about big injustices and speak up about small injustices. And, maybe when I say small injustices, that's where the humor helps. Like this example of not being mentioned in photo captions, it's a tiny thing, but, when it happens 1,000 times to women all the time, it all adds up. So I would just say to speak up and use your voice. And I'm hoping if anybody who has read the book has seen, and this is sort of part of my plan about not being too prescriptive, but there's 11 chapters in the book. 9 of them then in the middle are each address a certain dimension of society. And when I was writing it, I really tried in my mind to have a sort of takeaway thesis in each chapter that was maybe don't leave any groups behind, or take up all your space, or use your voice. And I don't really usually say those things explicitly in each chapter, but I hope when you're reading the book, maybe you'll take a look and think about each of those chapters and what message I'm trying to bring across with each of them.
That's great. Thank you, Eliza. Here's another question from Adina. What is it about the overall sociopolitical culture of Iceland that you would attribute to the more progressive ideology of gender balance and equality? Mm-hmm. You talk about this in the book, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, there's a few, it's a small country and it's pragmatic. And so, the men were away fishing and the women had to manage everything. And if you have to run a whole country and you have a few population, you can't afford to be keeping down any groups. You have to give everybody as much opportunity as you can. And then I think we see that the more gender equal societies are, the more peaceful they are, the happier they are, the longer living they are. And we started to see the results of those things, which means that we want to work more towards achieving them as well. So the fact that you sort of start to see results is also beneficial. And I really think, in Iceland, we've passed the tipping point of debating whether gender equality is an important objective, and more debating how we're going to try to achieve it. And it's important to have that debate, obviously, because there's, different schools of thought there. But I think that, yeah, it's important. And we've got great female role models throughout history. I profile several of them in the book as well. And I think role models are very, very important.
Well, here's a final question we have from Christine in Vancouver, and there's a bit of a prologue. It says, Eliza has talked about the contrasts compared to Canada, or ways in which young children grow up in Iceland. They seem to have more independence, even going shopping on their own. When visiting friends there, I noticed a very young girl making her own waffles on a hot waffle iron with no help from mom. No way that would happen here. So the question is, do the parents walk or drive them to and from school? Do they make their own lunches? What's the most popular trendy food in Iceland right now? Okay, we've got a few little questions.
There's a few questions. I think I might forget to answer some. I'm not.
Okay, I'll prompt you.
Okay, there's less helicopter parenting, I would say. So there is this more independent nature that there always has been for kids. And again, that's facilitated because parents are working and they're busy and sort of running around. So I would say that is part of it. And yeah, really kids are kind of trusted to do a lot more. In terms of what was the other, do the kids drive? So the weather is very bad. So often, and it's dark in the wintertime. So I would say, in theory, kids walk to school by themselves. You can see my son in the background. I hope is this okay? Yeah. Talking about children doing that. He's eating some M&Ms there. So I think, in terms of children walking to school or not, if you live close enough, someone in grade 1 would walk to school by themselves. But what happens sometimes is that, in the wintertime, it's dark a lot of the time when you're going to school, or the weather is bad. And then, of course, it's a little bit different. So.
Right. That final question about food trends. I'm trying to remember what kind of interesting food I had when I was in Iceland. Anything hot right these
I'm going to ask
days?
My 12-year-old son is here, and he can maybe contribute for kids. In one word, honey, can you take what? The food trends of Iceland. You're speaking to many people here, so keep it.
How would I say? What do you mean, like?
What do people like to eat in Iceland? Kids, pizza, right?
Don't you pizza's one, but like burgers.
Yeah, kind of like in Canada, right?
Yes, a lot like that.
Kind of like in Canada.
How many people am I talking to?
Just a lot of people.
How many? I want a specific number.
I don't know. We don't know. Thanks, honey.
Could be thousands.
That's
my number.
Yeah.
Those are all the questions we have. Eliza, It's really been great speaking with you, and I certainly wish you well with the book. It's such a great achievement. Do you have another book in you?
A book, as the Icelanders say, you walk with a book in your belly. Right. I'd love to write another book sometime, and so I've really liked the process. So I just have to see. Hopefully, now everything is picking up. There's a lot of travel, as you can see now, and all of this, and then you don't have time to think of other things. And I'm just so much enjoying all this, and I'm so grateful for all the positive support and everything that's happening. So I suppose I can answer that. I really hope that I get another idea that I think, this will make a great book. So we'll see what happens.
Well,
as we say in Iceland, it'll come in the light.
Right. Well, we all hope it does happen, and you've earned every bit of what's been coming your way. It's a wonderful book. Not only is it a wonderful book, I would hazard to say that it's an important book. And I think it actually could be the model for other countries. Without you telling them they should do it, it can stand as a model for how other countries might move towards gender equality. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I think John's going to come back and say a few things to wrap us up.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. You're not rid of me yet. And I'd just like to thank you both for such an incredible conversation. It was lovely to be able to sit back and listen to you both chat. I'd also just like to express some gratitude to all of our partners once again for this afternoon. To Lögberg-Heimskringla, if you're at all interested in what's going on in the North American Icelandic community, Lögberg's been around for forever and has such incredibly insightful coverage of arts, culture, everything you could possibly need. So please do pick up a copy. And again, to all the good folks at the Icelandic Canadian Frón, based out of the Scandinavian Cultural Centre here in Winnipeg, a wonderful community hub and an incredible organization that does so much wonderful programming. I'd also like to, of course, thank Simon & Schuster Canada for publishing this book in the first place, and for making this event happen. So thank you kindly to all those folks there, and to our colleagues in Saskatoon and McNally Robinson for helping to promote the event there as well. Again, the book is Secrets of the Sprakkar by Eliza Reid. We have signed copies here, which you can order online, in person, over the phone, and we deliver anywhere. So one way or another, we'll find a way to get a copy of this book in your hands. And the wonderfully prolific and fantastic host, Terry Fallis, his most recent book is Operation Angus. He also has a few other books that you might be interested in, so please do take full advantage of that. And again, thank you all for spending the afternoon with us. And thank you, Eliza, for taking the time out of your busy schedule, and to your son as well for joining us this afternoon.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
lovely
much.
afternoon.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Signe. Thank you, John. See you soon.
Great to see you. Great to see you all.